Yo guys, I'm
for his
planning to watch a video about Bill Gates, some report, but before that, give me a second till I'm playing. I want to check my stream. And we'll continue with the hardcore. I'm level 69. I'll just show you that I'm actually on hardcore. See my character here, hardcore. Runes of Uldu. Just give me a 69.
association with Jeffrey Epstein.
In fact, honestly, thinking Bill Gates is outright evil is kind of the norm now.
Embattled Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates has undergone a stunning fall from grace.
But if you're like me, you probably remember a time not that long ago where Bill Gates wasn't hated, but was actually one of the most loved people in the world.
Bill and Melinda Gates continue to inspire us with their impatient optimism that together we can remake the world as it should be.
I mean that literally. There's a global survey from less than 10 years ago that ranked Bill Gates as the most admired man on Earth.
You're making such a huge difference, so I'm glad you're a billionaire.
But my point here is that for 25 years before he was the cute, cuddly billionaire spending his fortune to save sick babies, Bill Gates was the most hated businessman in America.
And I happen to have a special guest with me today.
Throughout his career as the inventor of the computer as we know it today, he was accused of lying, cheating, stealing, sabotaging competitors, bullying employees,
understood the first thing about this.
Destroying entire companies.
He is indefatigable and he's absolutely focused and he wants it all. He's young and he's mean and he's not tired.
And building Microsoft into such a dominant force that the United States Department of Justice had to step in to stop him from destroying the same industry he had created.
The real question is, how much more could have been achieved without the dead hand of monopoly?
How many of you use a PC without Microsoft's operating system? Gentlemen, that's a monopoly. That's a lock. That's 100%.
So just to give you guys a fair warning, this probably isn't going to be the type of video where we talk about how Bill Gates controls the weather and put microchips in our COVID vaccines, but we are going to look at how he actually controls the world anyway. Because Bill Gates really did help save millions of lives, and he really did help create the world of computers as we know it. He is one of the most consequential people in the world. It's just that while he was doing that, he created a level of control and influence over our civilization that no other person in modern history could match. Eventually, he became the perfect symbol of the billionaire age itself, the structure of power under which all of us are living today. Or as I like to call it, the age where the people who created our problems are allowed to sell us the solution. This is the story of Bill Gates.
Police and security guards in Belgium were caught flat-footed today by a cowardly sneak attack on one of the world's wealthiest men. The target was Microsoft chairman Bill Gates, arriving for a meeting with community leaders. Watch what happens when a team of hitmen meet him first with a pie in the face. Gates was momentarily and understandably shaken, but he was not injured. The hit squad piled on with two more pies before one of them was wrestled to the ground.
Let's wind back the clock just a little bit and see how we got here. It's 1982, a time before social media, before online video, before the internet, before average people like you and I used computers at all. A time when the technology that defines our world today was nothing but a dream of the future.
We already know that the 1970s will bring the superjet age of technology. And we are fast approaching the ideal information handling system we dreamed of many years ago. We in the IBM company face the same challenge as you do.
Right now, almost but not quite 200 people work at Microsoft. As a relatively early stage small startup, they work out of a bland beige 2-story office building in Seattle. Or really not Seattle, but Seattle's more suburban little sister, Bellevue. Their office sits between a preschool, a La Quinta Inn, and a restaurant called Burger Master. And their CEO is 26 years old. His name is William Henry Gates III, but everyone calls him Bill. He's the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of a nerd, with huge glasses that cover half his face, and he wears bizarrely ugly sweaters every day. He drives a green Porsche 911, and he crashes it all of the time. When his employees bring him an idea that he doesn't like, he has a habit of responding with, "That's the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard." Okay, bit clean in here. What's going on, guys? I guess I probably don't do this angle all that often, but I've got my books. I've got my Bill Gates fan fiction. Let's dive into it. On paper, 27-year-old Bill Gates is already a multi-millionaire. But people around him describe that he still works 100 hours every week, no matter what. Right now, though, Microsoft's flagship product is called MS-DOS, and it's a 16-bit, single-user, single-tasking, command-line-driven, disk-based operating system written in 8086 assembly language. Whatever that means. The American public is generally unaware of who Bill Gates is, let alone his company. On the rare occasions the press has covered him, they treat Microsoft as a curiosity, a small startup run by a nerdy-looking Harvard dropout from Seattle. Even back then, though, Bill Gates makes his vision very clear.
A lot of people are forecasting that there'll be software stores just like there are record stores today, and that there'll be thousands and thousands of those. And I think I'd have to agree with that.
And during an interview he does for the first ever edition of PC Magazine, his prediction for the next 5 years of computers is bold. Bold, bordering between unlikely and pure fantasy. He says, "We'll be able to put on somebody's desk for an incredibly low cost a processor with more capability than you could ever use. In other words, we will have changed the way people work. The office of the future will be the office of the present 5 years from today."
Eventually what will happen is that everyone will have a personal computer on their desk. We really believe that a personal computer will be valuable for everyone. We also believe that eventually it'll be worthwhile to have one in the home, but that's going to take a lot longer to make come true.
He believes that computers are the future, and he illustrates this with this one mantra that he says over and over and over: a computer on every desk and in every home.
Well, I think we will get one in every office and in every home. Exciting vision of a machine on every desktop. I have no doubt that that vision of a computer in every home, that'll absolutely be achieved.
And we know today that that dream kind of did come true. When I look around at all the computers on my desk, I have my monitor, which is technically a computer. I have my Mac desktop. I have my iPhone. This is a computer. I have my camera. This is also a computer. I'm filming on a camera right now. I have AirPods, which is a computer.
This is a different panel than I've had. Everything's a computer. That's beautiful. Wow.
You get my point. But at the time, no one else agrees with him at all. Ken Olsen, who's the founder of one of the biggest computer companies in the 1960s, whose computers cost $25,000 and weighed more than a refrigerator, famously said, "There's no reason for any individual to have a computer in his home." And that was basically the prevailing sentiment at the time. But Bill Gates and his team are willing to do whatever it will take to make his vision of the future come true. And famously, there was one part of their mission statement they would sometimes leave out: a computer on every desk and in every home, running Microsoft software. Right now, though, Microsoft's most important invention is about to be a word that, unlike their 16-bit single-user, single-tasking operating system, we still say today. The word is vaporware.
Vaporware.
It's vaporware.
Vaporware is when a company announces a new product, promises a release date, generates headlines and excitement, and runs marketing campaigns, and then what they do come out with is far too little and far too late. Sometimes, vaporware never comes out at all. Tesla announced the Roadster 2 in 2017, a bleeding-edge electric sports car that would be faster and cooler than anything ever made, but 9 years later, it still doesn't exist. Theranos was a startup that was founded on the promise of of devices that could run hundreds of medical tests from one drop of blood. They raised almost $1 billion from investors, although it was eventually revealed that the underlying concept was actually medically impossible, and its youngest self-made woman billionaire founder was sent to prison for fraud, where she remains to this day. My point is that vaporware describes everything our society has come to hate about modern tech and modern capitalism. Unfinished or dishonest products, marketing without substance, and the general enshittification of everything we consume. But I'm not saying that they were the first ones to do vaporware and someone else made the word to describe them. They literally invented the word vaporware inside the company to describe how they were going to control and dominate the tech industry in the early 80s. At the end of 1983, Microsoft held a massive announcement at the Grand Historic Plaza Hotel in New York City, unveiling their brand new graphical operating system Windows with flash and pizzazz, and a promise that this groundbreaking software would release in just 6 months.
The retail package of Microsoft Windows. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's here.
However, they weren't the first to the punch. VisiCorp, a company from Boston, already had an operating system for sale in 1982, and it was one of the first modern operating systems as we know it, with a mouse for controlling the interface and multitasking apps, blah blah blah. You get what I mean. It was more powerful and modern than anything that Microsoft had done yet, and with VisiCorp's yearly revenue being 15 times higher than Microsoft at the time, their success was apparent. When Windows was announced, though, with so many promises and such bombastic fanfare, enough PC manufacturers signed on to include Windows on their new machines that VisiCorp sales declined massively. Meanwhile, when the spring of 1983 rolls around, Windows 1.0 is nowhere to be found. It won't actually be released for another 20 months, or more than 2 years after it was first announced. At this point, magazine editors started saying stuff like, buyers believe in Microsoft release dates with the same fervor that they believe in Santa Claus. In the end, by the time Windows was actually released, VisiCorp had gone completely bankrupt. They weren't the only one either. The Windows release debacle killed a whole category of companies. GEM, DeskView, Software Arts, these were all pretty big software companies back in the day, and they were all destroyed by the announcement of Windows looking bigger and better than anything they had made. In reality, though, Microsoft had strangled their competitors to death with software that didn't even exist, and I mean that literally. During all the time when Windows was not out yet, when the rest of the industry stopped buying other programs in anticipation of what Microsoft might make, it turned out that Windows did not really exist. What they had announced in reality was a couple of screenshots that they had not even yet started making work.
We got a calendar program that uses the graphical interface. We got a card file. We got a terminal program.
But at least Microsoft Windows 1.0 was groundbreaking, right? Well, not really. Windows 1.0 actually got terrible reviews. Journalists called it clunky, magazines wrote that the entire thing was running off floppy disks that felt like pouring molasses in the Arctic, and one magazine scored it a 4 out of 10. And ultimately, while their pre-orders were high with all the marketing they had done, Windows ended up selling less than 500,000 copies in the first 2 years. Even in the early days of personal computers, that was a flop. But for all their failures, dishonesty, and lies, they were only rewarded with a bigger, better profile than ever before and a list of competitors who had literally gone out of business in the meantime. They had won the race, even though they were cheating. In all of this, the lies, the strangulation, it was only the beginning. For the next 20 years, Bill Gates and Microsoft would change the world by building the most powerful and the most hated company in the history of American business. It's 1985. Microsoft has grown to almost but not quite 1,000 employees. They outgrew their bland beige 2-story suburban office building, and by that I mean they expanded to occupy 4 more, all still on the same street in between Burgermaster and La Quinta, and a strangely high number of dental clinics. Bill Gates is now 29 years old. He still wears odd sweaters and huge glasses and kind of looks like a kid. The media still seems to not entirely know what to make of him. In one profile for Fortune magazine, he's called the Rabid Rabbit, a gawky, bookish nerd who is intensely competitive and aloof and sarcastic. One interview described his fashion sense at work as pizza-stained t-shirts that make clients mistake him for the office boy. All the same, though, he's now worth around $100 million.
We're expecting to do just over $100 million this year.
Although when CNBC runs his first major TV interview, he proudly declares that he isn't in it for the money.
I don't think anyone at the company is in it for the money. Creation of these programs is something you can sit down and see people enjoying and solving real problems.
If you would stay...
His profile has increased, no doubt, but the general public is still largely unaware or unable to understand why Bill Gates matters so much. At the same time, though, he just keeps telling the same story about what Microsoft is and what it's going to be. Famously, at one computer conference, one of his competitors says, "Bill works so much harder than us. He's going to succeed. We may as well just give in." Whether or not that was said to be funny or with a twinge of genuine fear, either way, people were starting to wonder just how far this kid will go to win. Still though, Bill Gates is far from achieving his true goal of computers on every desk and in every home. But 3,000 miles east of their quiet, boring headquarters in suburban Seattle sits another boring headquarters in suburban New York, where IBM, International Business Machines, or as it's sometimes referred to, Big Blue, calls home. And Big Blue is a company that represents the status Bill Gates wants to achieve but doesn't yet have. For every one employee at Microsoft, IBM has 400. 400,000 people work there. IBM computers run America's banks, airlines, the federal government, and NASA. They are the computer company. They make $30 billion every year, and they want to hire Microsoft, whose programmers wear t-shirts and sandals to work, to build them the operating system of the future. Bill Gates is 29, and he's being handed the keys to become the biggest software company in the world. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. It's just that by the time it's over, IBM, the most valuable computer company on Earth, will be dead in the water, and the world will never see Bill Gates himself the same way again. The press at the time called the partnership between Microsoft and IBM a wedding, so I'm going to do that too. Here's how it went down. By the mid-80s, IBM, despite being a huge company, was struggling to keep their market share with PCs because they forgot to copyright their last operating system. So tons of companies like HP and Compaq were popping up with cheaper desktops that ran the same programs as IBM's more expensive computers. But IBM's plan to take the market and their throne back was simple. Use their infinite resources to build a new computer that was better than anything else and copyright every part of it. The only problem was they still needed a software veteran to make a new, better operating system. And since IBM could get whoever they wanted, they naturally chose Microsoft as the obvious partner. The wedding happened in August of 1985, but there were a couple of things that IBM didn't know about their new wife. First of all was that, obviously, Microsoft already had Windows, their main operating system. But officially, the Windows brand was actually set to be retired once OS/2, the collaboration between IBM and Microsoft, was finally ready.
MS-DOS is our single most profitable product. It'll be replaced by OS/2, the next generation, over the next 2 or 3 years. You asked, do I worry about something? Yeah, I worry about OS/2 being a well-received product. But it's...
In reality, though, about 3 years into the development of OS/2 with IBM, Microsoft hires Dave Cutler, one of the greatest operating system architects in the world, and puts him in a separate building with about a dozen people to help him and one instruction: build a brand new operating system from scratch that Microsoft owns outright. And his only condition for taking this job is that he would never be seen by or speak to anybody from IBM. And so in the end, in May of 1990, just a little while after OS/2 finally launched, Microsoft alone launches Windows 3.0 at a multi-million-dollar event in New York City.
Today we're introducing Microsoft Windows version 3.
It sells 1 million copies in 4 months, 15 million within a year. Reviewers called it groundbreaking. PC Magazine writes that May of 1990 marks the beginning of a new era for computers. Microsoft had tricked IBM into paying them to design their own downfall. By the time January of 1993 rolled around, IBM announced an annual loss of $8 billion the year before, the largest single-year corporate loss in American history. Their company would never be the same again. At a pivotal moment when the future of computers was being decided, Microsoft had tricked them into ruining their own future. IBM still exists today, but they never recovered the position they had in the middle of the 80s. Within 5 years of releasing OS/2, they ended up laying off 100,000 employees, and today they deal mainly in computing for large businesses, and most people don't even know they exist anymore at all. The press at the time called the partnership between Microsoft and IBM a wedding. In reality, it was a heist. OS/2 was ultimately quickly forgotten because it just wasn't that good. But Windows 3, the project that Microsoft had used the money IBM had given them to develop OS/2 to actually make, it was pretty groundbreaking. It didn't suck, it had real graphics, overlapping windows, it was kind of modern. It's just that it only existed because Bill Gates had spent the last 5 years sabotaging and hiding the truth from the partner who was paying his bills. The point is, though, that now that Microsoft had all the leverage in the world, they were only going to keep using it to hold the entire computer industry hostage. It's 1994. Microsoft now employs more than 50,000 people. Their campus grows bigger and bigger as they build new facilities and hire thousands with each passing year.
Based in Redmond, Washington, Microsoft employs thousands of people worldwide. The company operates on a vision of a computer on every desk, in every home, running Microsoft software.
They recently moved to take over a gigantic plot of land that used to be a chicken farm. Bill Gates is now 37, although he kind of still looks like a kid. He still wears the same goofy sweaters and glasses, but really, that's about the only thing that stayed the same. He recently got married on the Hawaiian island of Lanai in a private ceremony on New Year's Day where he paid Willie Nelson to play the hits for the reception and chartered every single helicopter in Hawaii for his guests. And in the last couple years, Microsoft went public, which made him the youngest self-made billionaire in American history. He's now the richest man in the US overall, and will soon be the richest man in the world. Microsoft is also thriving. The dream of a computer on every desk and in every home, it's coming true. By the end of 1994, there are almost 60 million personal computers in the US. 54 million of them are running on Microsoft Windows. The company has, in 15 years, gone from designing a flop operating system that only sold 200,000 copies from a 2-story office in between a burger restaurant and a dental clinic to designing the interface of modern life. Their stock is up 5,000%. They are the most successful software company ever. Word, Excel, and PowerPoint are used by every accountant, secretary, and student in America. Bill Gates has been invited to the White House, profiled in 60 Minutes, and graced the cover of Time, Newsweek, Fortune, and Forbes, all multiple times. He's the great American success story of the late 20th century. Microsoft is soon going to be the most valuable company in America. It will also be the most hated, and Bill Gates will be at the center of all of it. Microsoft recently lost a trial to a small California company called Stack Electronics for having stolen patented code from them. They were ordered to pay a $120 million restitution. They then turned around and did it again. They were then found to have embedded a piece of encrypted code inside Windows that did nothing but make a competitor's program crash. After they were exposed, they put it back. At the same time, though, Windows has crossed 90% market share. It is practically the only computer operating system in the industry. And so in the mid-90s, the only part of the tech industry that Microsoft doesn't totally control is actual physical computers. The actual physical machines, keyboards, monitors, beige plastic boxes, processors, RAM, they don't make those. Computers are built by Compaq, Dell, IBM, HP, Toshiba, but Microsoft is going to find a way to dominate them anyway, because if you want to sell a computer with Windows on it, you have to pay Microsoft a royalty, which is fair enough. But the contract Microsoft offered, called a per processor license, requires that you pay that royalty on every computer you sell. Not every Windows computer, but every computer, whether Windows is on it or not. That's how powerful Microsoft was. They could force you to pay a portion of every sale you make just for the right to use their software at all. And in late 1995, when Compaq, the largest PC maker at the time, removed the Internet Explorer icon from their default desktop setup, Microsoft sent them a letter of intent to terminate licensing. Simply put, if they didn't put the Internet Explorer icon back, they would no longer be able to sell Windows at all. And Compaq, even though they were the biggest computer company on the planet, had no choice. Within 2 weeks, they put the Internet Explorer icon back on the desktop. By the middle of the 90s, Microsoft's market share, in fact, passed 96%. Every computer on every desk in every home was a Microsoft PC, not by choice, but by force. It's now 1998, and Microsoft employs 30,000 people. The company is worth around $600 billion. It is the most valuable company in the world. The Microsoft campus has grown to more than 40 buildings. Windows market share is, again, over 95%. They own the computer industry. Microsoft has become so big that they reshaped the economy and culture of the Seattle area, driving high real estate prices and development throughout the entire region. Microsoft employees are known as Microsoft millionaires, with more than 15,000 employees at the time becoming millionaires from the stock options they receive at work. They recently founded a magazine, Slate Magazine, and they established an American cable news channel called MSNBC. Yes, the MS in MSNBC stands for Microsoft. Bill Gates is now 42 years old. He still wears the sweaters and he still looks kind of young. His net worth is more than $60 billion. He is worth more than the entire GDP of the country of New Zealand. And at this point, America has finally figured out exactly what to make of Bill Gates. In the comic strip Doonesbury, he's a recurring villain who offers people money to stop competing with him. One website goes viral for being dedicated to displaying how much wealth he accumulates every minute of every hour of every day. He's ridiculed and mocked on Saturday Night Live. The Onion dedicates pages and pages to making fun of him. There are books, think pieces, and documentaries all about Microsoft's aggressive, unethical business practices. Time magazine, who once proudly featured him on the cover as the future of American business, calls him a monopolist. Business Week publishes an article titled Bill Gates, Robber Baron. The front page of the Wall Street Journal says Bill Gates enjoys monopoly power that even John D. Rockefeller could envy. At one point, a man hides in a corner and hits him in the face with a pie. Eventually, even Hollywood makes a movie about him, cast of course as the villain. In the film, he screams at employees, steals from Steve Jobs, and famously says,
"You make people need you. You survive because you make them need what you have. And then they have nowhere else to go."
The world wanted to know why Bill Gates was the way he was. His mind, his ambition, it became the central focus of Microsoft's rise to power and control. He wasn't just another CEO. He represented everything wrong with American greed in a way that people wanted to understand. And there was one thing in particular that seemed to make it all make sense. Cornering Compaq, destroying IBM from within, turning Microsoft into the biggest company in America by lying, cheating, and stealing. To understand Bill Gates, the kind of person he is, what makes him tick, we need to understand what he did to Paul Allen. And to do that, we need to go back in time and start from the very beginning. It's the mid-1960s, and Bill Gates is growing up in a large house in a quiet neighborhood in Seattle. His parents are young, both in their 20s, although his father is already a successful corporate lawyer and soon to be president of the Washington State Bar Association. His mother is the granddaughter of an early 1900s West Coast banking president. They have a summer home by the ocean just north of the city. Their friends are bankers, lawyers, and politicians. They are, by any definition, an elite family. In 1968, his parents enroll him at Lakeside, an elite private school in Seattle that has something almost no other school in America does: a computer. It weighs 2,000 pounds, and it's bigger than a New York City bedroom, but Bill takes to it immediately. He learns to write simple games like tic-tac-toe until he meets another student who's equally obsessed, a quiet kid 2 years older named Paul Allen. They spend their high school years together, writing software that monitors traffic patterns for the city of Seattle, and they even build a payroll system for their high school's accounting computers. Gates eventually goes to Harvard to study math, although 2 years in, after reportedly telling people that he had not yet met anybody smarter than him, he drops out, goes home, and starts a company called Microsoft with his best friend, Paul Allen. Inside Microsoft, Paul Allen was the visionary, the one who saw the future and dragged Gates into starting the company in the first place. Bill Gates was more like the closer, the guy who handled the customers, the contracts, and the negotiations with their clients who were 20 times Microsoft's size. The Microsoft offices looked more like a fraternity than a software company. Programmers slept under desks, pizza boxes were left everywhere, but Paul Allen and Bill Gates had something that no one else in the industry did, which was a coherent picture of where personal computers were going to go. Within a couple of years, Apple, Commodore, Radio Shack, General Electric, Texas Instruments, and Intel were all clients of Microsoft. This young company started by two even younger guys. But it wasn't really because those companies chose Microsoft. The story goes that it was really because Bill Gates wouldn't take no for an answer. His strategy for closing deals in the early days was to walk into a room and humiliate the client until they signed, identifying their insecurities, telling them how stupid they would be to consider anyone else, lying about Microsoft's capabilities outright, and overpromising on what they could deliver. One former Microsoft executive described Bill Gates' tactics as vicious. When his staff didn't meet his standards, he would scream, call them idiots, and slam doors. The only counterweight to Gates' temperament inside Microsoft was Paul Allen. One early Microsoft employee would later recall Paul was much easier to work for. He would blow up, but 5 minutes later it would be as if nothing happened. Of the two, I'd rather work for Paul than Bill any day. We were always relieved when Bill Gates was out of town. In 1980, Microsoft got the phone call that would change the company forever. IBM, the largest tech company in the world, was building their first personal computer, and they needed software to go on it. The real story, though, is how they met. Back in those days, Mary Maxwell Gates, Bill's mother, had her own career trajectory to look after, and by 1980, she was serving on the National Executive Committee of United Way, which is the largest charity in the United States. Sitting on the same committee was a man named John Opel, who was the CEO and president of IBM. And the story goes that at one point, Mary brought up her son's company in conversation with Opel. A few weeks after that, IBM gave Microsoft the contract to build MS-DOS. The most consequential business deal in the history of computers was made because Bill Gates' mother was a well-connected socialite. The IBM contract turned Microsoft into a serious company almost overnight. It was the single most important thing that ever happened to any of them. But it was at this exact moment, when everything they had ever worked for was finally happening, that Paul Allen was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, a very serious and very deadly form of cancer. Allen kept working during the chemotherapy, that is, until December of 1982, when he walked into the Microsoft offices after his treatment and overheard a conversation in Gates' office where Gates and Steve Ballmer, Microsoft's new business chief, were discussing how to dilute Paul Allen's ownership of the company by issuing themselves stock options to shrink his share. Paul Allen, at that moment sick, exhausted, and recovering from cancer, was being ridden out of the business he had co-founded with his childhood best friend. He confronted them, and Bill Gates backed off, but Allen never came back. He resigned from Microsoft a few months later. Allen would pass away when the same cancer he had in the 80s came back in 2018, although in his memoir, he would tell stories of Gates threatening, demeaning, and screaming at the people around him, including Allen himself. He described Gates as having an abusive personality, and he wrote that, on some days, working with Bill was like being in hell. He recalled meetings in which Gates would scream at employees for over an hour, calling them stupid, idiots, and rocking back and forth in his chair as he tore into them.
That's ridiculous. I'm not using this thing. No. Somebody's confused. Somebody's just not thinking. I mean, there's no way.
We'll figure it out.
Bill Gates, by Paul Allen's account, thrived on conflict. He even wrote that in the early days of Microsoft, when they were essentially just kids starting a company, Gates had taken Paul Allen's shares down from 50-50 to 60-40 and then 70-30. And that Paul Allen had been too afraid to say no. He wrote that after one such argument, in that moment, something died inside me. Nothing, not friendship, not respect, not right and wrong or good or evil, would stop Bill Gates from growing his power, influence, and control. There's one thing, though, that Bill Gates never predicted for the future, and that's the fact that right now, today, the names, addresses, and personal information, the identities of average Americans like you and me, are worth their weight in gold. Because right now, companies all over the world, including Microsoft themselves, are engaged in the buying and selling of our personal information for marketing and outreach and operations, and it's created a global system where, as you're watching this video, your full name, home address, phone number, email, a list of your family members and all their information, it's sitting totally exposed on the internet. This happens because we're living in a time when our identities are no longer a private thing we own. Who you are at your core has become a product, recorded, assembled, and resold by companies you probably never heard of. Some of them, like Microsoft's own ad technology arm, Xandr, log everything you do online and auction it to the highest bidder. Other companies take that data and they publish it on websites that anyone can access all the time. The consequences of us living in this reality now are pretty crazy. It's not just about marketing and ads, it's about your own personal privacy. Because another result of this massive web of data is data brokers who exist purely to put your personal info online for people to look at and search through for free. This is literally the sort of thing that keeps me up at night, because doxing used to require effort. It's now totally free. If you post something controversial online that someone doesn't like or some group of people disagree with, your home address is one search away. Someone who wants to expose your personal information doesn't need to be a hacker, all they need is their iPhone. And there isn't a lot of attention paid to this in the media today, but it really is silently destroying our quality of life in a lot of ways. That's why I'm genuinely proud to be sponsored by Incogni, because Incogni is a personal data removal service. They track down your exposed information across hundreds of sites, they get it taken down automatically. All you have to do is sign up, share the information they need, and they handle the rest forever. For me personally, Incogni is literally a necessity. I would not be able to sleep at night if I knew that me and my family's personal information was readily available all the time. I'm genuinely not kidding. For a long time, it was becoming hugely concerning to me that every time I released a new video, I would get floods of text messages from strange numbers complimenting my latest upload, and I could never tell if it was coming from a crazy stalker or if it was a veiled threat. Either way, ever since I got set up with Incogni, it hasn't been a problem. Right now, it's more important than ever, not just useful, but legitimately important to disappear from the internet as much as you can. We're living in a time when the websites and apps you use are collecting information about who you are at your very core, your sexual orientation, your hobbies, your shopping habits, your religious beliefs, your political affiliations, and they're monetizing it against you. You could be tracked down in real life, you or your family can be connected by someone who wants to harm you, or your identity can even be stolen by information found on the internet. Luckily, Incogni actually offers custom removals, which is a feature where you send them any website that you want to find with your data on it, and they can get rid of it for you. It's really no longer safe to assume that your personal information is safe. Data brokers, scammers, stalkers, they have more power over us than ever before, and it's become essentially mandatory to act with this in mind. Incogni luckily offers a variety of plans to meet your needs. I personally like how the family plan helps protect all the people I'm connected to in real life, and of course, the unlimited plan gives access to custom removals. But whatever you choose, I cannot recommend Incogni enough as the best way to protect your personal data in a time when your personal data is the easiest way to harm, harass, or steal from you, and it's more accessible than it ever has been before. So take control of your privacy, support the independent journalism we're doing here at Volksgeist, and best of all, get 60% off an Incogni plan at incogni.com/Volksgeist right now. That's 60% off an annual plan at incogni.com/Volksgeist. By 1998, Bill Gates is the most hated man in American business. He represents not progress, not prosperity, but pure greed. While no one would say that Microsoft didn't revolutionize the computer industry, it was just that the way he did it made it seem to almost everyone like he was only revolutionary because he killed everyone he had been competing with. Even Microsoft's closest rival, Apple, was essentially at death's door. And I mean that literally. Apple might be the most valuable computer company in the world today, but in the late 90s they were known for bad software, poor leadership, and laptops that sometimes spontaneously caught on fire. There was a point where Apple once went through 4 CEOs in 4 years. By the summer of 1997, Apple was actually only 90 days away from going out of business forever, and it looked like they weren't going to make it until Bill Gates decided to invest $150 million at the last second. When Steve Jobs announced the deal at a conference in Boston, Gates' face smiling smugly on the giant wall behind him was greeted by the audience with boos and insults.
And I'd like to announce one of our first partnerships today, a very, very meaningful one, and that is one with Microsoft. And I happen to have a special guest with me today. Get him up on the stage right now.
In exchange for the investment, all Apple had to do was make Internet Explorer the default browser on every Mac computer, which really isn't too bad of a deal to save your company until we see why exactly this deal was done in the first place. Because it wasn't that Bill Gates loved Steve Jobs and Apple and wanted the company to survive. They actually hated each other, with Gates calling Steve Jobs flawed as a human being, while Steve Jobs would routinely go on TV interviews and say stuff like, Microsoft makes third-rate products and has absolutely no taste.
I have a problem with the fact that they just make really third-rate products.
So if it seems like it doesn't make sense that Bill Gates would go and save Apple from going out of business, it's because that isn't what he was doing. By saving Apple from their own bankruptcy, he was actually trying to save himself. Like I've mentioned so many times already, at this point, Microsoft controls 96% of the computer market in America. Apple is literally their only rival, which means that if Apple dies, it would be undeniable that Microsoft is exactly what people had been accusing them of being, a monopoly. And a monopoly in American business is not something you want to be. Unfortunately, the strategy didn't work. I mean, Apple survived, but less than a year after the investment went through, the Department of Justice files a lawsuit against Microsoft accusing them of being an illegal monopoly. The exact reason why that happened is yet another story that sounds almost exactly like every other one I've already told you in this video, because Bill Gates at this point just can't stop. The dawn of the internet in the mid-90s began to solidify the vision that personal computers were more likely a fact of life than a novelty for most people, and internet browsers were the world's new portal into that future. But Microsoft, for all their dominance, didn't get there first. The company that did was a small startup called Netscape. Netscape Communications was founded in 1994 by a 22-year-old programmer named Mark Andreessen. He had co-written the first mainstream graphical web browser, as we know it today, as a college senior at the University of Illinois. Andreessen was essentially in every way a young Bill Gates, a technical prodigy with an outsized self-belief and a clear view of where computing was about to go. As a result, he was on a trajectory to become very rich very fast.
Are you flustered by it, or are you just bothered by all this publicity?
Well, I don't think it's interesting beyond how it helps the company.
But you're an interesting guy to a lot of people.
That's kind of scary.
And so Netscape was officially launched at the end of 1994 from an office in a strip mall above a bagel shop in Mountain View, California. It cost $49, it shipped on a CD in the mail, and it was, for most people, the first window into the actual internet. Its loading screen, a shower of falling stars over a dark sky, was a visual that millions of Americans came to associate with going online. And despite their small size, Netscape became very popular very quickly. Within a year or so, Netscape's market share in the internet browser industry was almost 90%. But Bill Gates was not going to let that growth continue. In the summer of 1995, Microsoft executives walked into Netscape's office for what was supposed to be a meeting to make Netscape compatible with the newest Windows OS. What they did instead, though, was demand that they abandon the Windows market entirely and serve their internet browser only to Mac users. Or, and apparently they literally said this, or else. Anderson, who took handwritten notes throughout that day, wrote down that it was like talking to Don Corleone. He would later say, "I expected to find a bloody computer monitor in my bed the next morning." Even though Microsoft did end up withholding the code to make Netscape compatible with the newest Windows versions, they continued to blow up anyway. Before long, 25-year-old Mark Anderson was featured on magazine covers sitting on a golden throne as one of the new kings of the tech industry, with his net worth and profile accelerating the same way that Bill Gates had 10 years earlier. But it was ultimately too late. In retaliation for Netscape's continued success, Bill Gates ordered for Internet Explorer to be made completely free, and computer manufacturers were told they could not sell Windows without putting Internet Explorer on the desktop of every computer they shipped. Within 2 years, Netscape, whose only source of revenue was charging $49 for their program, went from 85% market share to less than 10%. While Internet Explorer went through the reverse. The heir to Bill Gates as the king of the tech industry had been strangled in his cradle. Bill Gates and Microsoft now control both the personal computer industry and the internet. Their domination over the world of tech has become absolute. The only problem was that the American government had been keeping an eye on Bill Gates for a while now. I mean, the government doesn't have a problem with big companies. This is America, but the problem is when a big company turns into the only company. When one company controls an entire industry or a market, when they have a monopoly, they can control prices, availability, everything. This was a huge problem during the Gilded Age of the late 1800s, back when men like Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, and Carnegie controlled large swaths of the American economy. So in 1890, Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act. And so for the next 100 years, every so often, the United States government will hold the company accountable and break it up when it gets too big. Standard Oil, John D. Rockefeller's company, once controlled 90% of all oil in the United States. But after a while, it was broken up into 34 different corporations by the Sherman Act. But my point is, by the end of the 90s, it was starting to look to everybody like that might be the best or really the only option for dealing with Microsoft. Microsoft had already been under investigation for most of the 90s, though. First by the FTC, then by the DOJ. They had actually been ordered by the government to sign a consent decree in 1994, where they agreed to stop doing some of the worst things, like forcing computer manufacturers to pay them a royalty on everything they sold, regardless of what operating system was installed. And they did agree, but they didn't actually stop. If anything, they got worse. Even after the government called them out the first time, they strangled Netscape, they strong-armed Compaq, they openly invested in saving Apple to save themselves in a way that everyone could recognize. And so in May of 1998, just a couple months after Bill Gates was infamously smacked in the face with a pie, 20 state attorney generals and the federal government filed United States versus Microsoft Corporation. And so when Bill Gates sat down for a deposition at Microsoft headquarters ahead of the trial beginning, what happened there ended up sealing his and his company's fate entirely. All Bill Gates does is rock back and forth in his chair and pretend not to understand the meaning of normal English words.
I don't know what you mean by that.
You don't?
No, I'm not sure.
Who was at this executive staff meeting?
Probably members of the executive staff.
Over the course of these 3 days, Bill Gates said, "I don't know, I don't remember, or I don't recall" more than 200 times. There's a point in the video where he debates the definition of the word definition.
I'm just saying there doesn't have to be a formal definition for two people to have a context in a conversation of what a word means. That is, neither one has to say, "I define the word as follows." So maybe I interpreted your use of the word definition too strictly. Okay, so if you define definition for this conversation in a loose way, then I'll understand what you mean.
Ultimately, it pretty much became a mass media spectacle that made him look worse than he ever had before. In the end, the judge ruled that Microsoft was indeed an illegal monopoly and that it should be broken in half, with one company for Windows and another company for everything else.
Those facts show a monopolist engaged in predatory and anti-competitive behavior. That was not simply its intent, ladies and gentlemen, that was its effect. They set out to accomplish what they wanted to do, which was to make sure that no one came near eroding their monopoly position on the Windows desktop operating system.
The decision to break Microsoft up was ultimately appealed and overturned, and Microsoft is still one of the top 5 biggest companies in the world today, but by this point, Bill Gates was actually already gone. Just a couple of weeks after the judge initially ruled that Microsoft was an illegal monopoly, Gates stepped down forever. He stepped away from Microsoft at a moment where his legacy was nothing if not extreme. On the one hand, extremely impressive. Bill Gates was one of the first people in the world to see that the future of work, communications, education, finance, entertainment, basically the entire modern reality we live in, would happen through personal computers in a moment where the average person didn't even know what PC stood for. The dream he had repeated constantly since he was 20 years old had come true. A computer on every desk and in every home. But the way he dragged this future into existence was so ruthless, so manipulative, so totalitarian that the United States government had to intervene to stop him from destroying the same industry he created. This was the contradiction of Bill Gates. He didn't fail upward, he wasn't a fraud. Sure, his socialite mom got him the first major contract of his career that made the rest of everything he ever did possible, but by and large, he genuinely changed the world. He just did it like he was at war with everyone else in his industry. And when the world finally started to hold him accountable, he walked away forever. At the same time though, he was only 44 years old. In business years, he's basically a kid. And despite the negative press, despite the way people hate him, despite the government ruling that he was doing business illegally, he's also still the richest man alive. So what could he possibly do next? Well, what he does next is that he announces he's going to save the world. In January of 2000, Bill Gates announces on a stage at the World Economic Forum that he's going to give $750 million of his own money to save children from disease in poor countries around the world. The most hated man on earth has just made the largest charitable donation ever. However, considering that he was the most hated man in America just a couple months earlier, the public was of course slow to trust what was happening here. But the promises made by Gates and his wife's new Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which they spent $5 billion initially funding, only kept increasing in scale. They promised to eradicate polio. They promised to cure malaria. They promised that they were going to end childhood death from preventable disease. They talked about fixing the American public education system. They talked about feeding sub-Saharan Africa. They were going to save, by their own count, 122 million lives. Their stated goal of working to dramatically reduce disease and poverty and build a more equal world was even more grand in scale than the amount of money they were spending on it. And the problems that they were going to spend their money and time on were some of humanity's darkest and most dire. I mean, literally. The situation at the time was darker than you would think. In the year 2000, malaria was killing around 800,000 children every year, almost all of them under the age of 5. Tuberculosis was killing another 300,000 children a year. There were, at the time, 15 million orphans, parents who had been killed by AIDS. Polio was paralyzing and killing almost exclusively kids in 80 countries around the world. And the vast majority of these deaths happened in places where the local medical clinic, if there was one, was a full day's walk away, and the doctor, if there was one of those, had never even been trained to administer vaccines in the first place. If it sounds like I just forgot about how much people hated Bill Gates a few years earlier, it's because, well, we kind of did forget. For some time, people would ask if Bill Gates really meant it. There's this one article from 2005 that I read titled "Capitalist Hero or Monopolist Villain," and in the article they refer to him as a symbol of evil who stifled innovation for his own profit. But there's a point where this type of discourse kind of just disappears. By the end of 2005, Bill Gates would be once again featured on the cover of Time magazine, although now as their Person of the Year. Their essay says, "For being shrewd about doing good, for rewiring politics and re-engineering justice, for making mercy smarter and hope strategic, and then daring the rest of us to follow, Bill and Melinda Gates and Bono are Time's Persons of the Year." It was hard to question his intentions when his intentions came in the form of the biggest charitable donations ever. It was around this time that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation annual budget grew to be twice the size of that of the World Health Organization itself. In 2006, Warren Buffett, the second richest person in the world at the time, openly pledged to give away 50% of his $60 billion fortune to the Gates Foundation. Gates, upon the announcement, said, "I think Warren will not only be known as the world's greatest investor, but the world's greatest investor in humanity." A little while after that, Gates very publicly goes back to his old university, Harvard, to accept an honorary Doctor of Laws degree and deliver the commencement speech for the year. Shortly after the Time article, he was given an honorary knighthood by Queen Elizabeth II. He began ranking in the top 5 of Gallup's Most Honored Man poll every year. Eventually, he steps down from any involvement with Microsoft altogether to focus entirely on managing the now 500 employees the foundation had hired to help him save the world. At a New York Times conference at the Lincoln Center, he's introduced as, and I quote, the most consequential individual of our generation. He was given the prize of peace, disarmament, and development by the President of India. The 2 futuristic U-shaped buildings they built as a headquarters for the Gates Foundation in downtown Seattle feature one guiding principle etched in granite above the entrances: all lives have equal value. It would be really easy to sit here and say, well, the world kind of just glazed Bill Gates because he threw billions of dollars at people's problems, but I kind of can't deny that him throwing money at people's problems actually worked really well. For one, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation basically eradicated polio around the world. Like, literally and completely, the disease barely exists anymore. But I don't think that really makes sense until I tell you how bad polio actually is. Polio is a virus that eats your motor neurons, the nerve cells that tell your muscles to move. And if that isn't bad enough, it doesn't stop at your arms or legs or hands or whatever, but for many people it paralyzes their lungs, which kills them. You don't live very long with paralyzed lungs. And polio moves fast too. It often can kill or paralyze its victims within a matter of hours. And polio has been affecting humanity for as long as history as we know it. There are Egyptian stone carvings from 4,000 years ago showing polio victims. It shows up in ancient Greek medical texts. They found skeletons of Roman children who are suspected to have had polio, and it even seems to appear in Renaissance paintings. Polio has been around since the beginning of civilization as we know it, hunting children and killing them. The context most of us have ever heard of polio from is when it caused a major national panic in 1950s America, because it was affecting tens of thousands of children and there was no way to stop it. There are photos of rows and rows of dozens of kids paralyzed, laying in giant steel tubes with their heads sticking out because that was the only way for them to breathe. By the late 1970s, it was mostly gone from the Western world, eradicated by vaccines, but it was still wreaking havoc in countries in Africa and Asia, where in the early 2000s, it was affecting more than 500,000 children every year. But that changed when Bill and Melinda Gates spent $10 billion to build an army that went all over the world handing out vaccines. I mean, literally, when you look at the details of how the Gates Foundation eradicated polio, it more closely resembled a military operation than a charity. They had to hire armies of vaccinators to go to the most remote settlements in the world, on motorcycles, on foot, on camels, in boats. The logistics of the project are so crazy, it sounds like the subject of a Wendover Productions video. In order to figure out where they needed more vaccines, they would collect wastewater from sewers, as in they would pull poop out of the pipes to look for viruses in it. In some parts of Pakistan and Afghanistan, they had to negotiate with the Taliban to get vaccinators into villages. Sadly, in fact, around 100 Gates Foundation vaccinators were murdered in Pakistan by the Taliban, who thought the program was a CIA front, which, side note, wasn't actually just them being paranoid, because the CIA did really run a fake vaccination program in Pakistan in the late 2000s as a way of collecting DNA samples from Osama bin Laden's relatives while he was still on the run. Anyway, in India, they hired 2.3 million vaccinators to vaccinate 100 million kids in 1 week. That literally does not sound true, I know, but it is, and it worked. India has now been polio-free for 14 years. Around the world, polio is now more or less almost extinct. 2024 was a bad year with almost 90 cases in Pakistan and Afghanistan, but broadly, polio has almost been eradicated, and that is because of the billions of dollars that Bill and Melinda Gates spent to make it happen. But polio is only one of many things that they spent billions of dollars on trying to save, fix, or improve. The Gates also spent over $7 billion fighting malaria. They funded the development of the world's first malaria vaccine, which the WHO finally approved in 2021, and they deployed billions of mosquito-proof nets across sub-Saharan Africa. All of that combined is estimated to have helped save over 12 million lives in the last 20 years. The Gates Foundation helped push that decline by funding simple yet essential services. One thing they did that I found genuinely interesting was reducing rotavirus deaths by about 75%. You don't hear a lot about rotavirus anymore, mainly because in countries like ours, the vaccine works so well that the disease has basically disappeared. But decades ago, rotavirus killed infants all over the world by the hundreds of thousands every year. I actually had rotavirus as an infant. There wasn't a vaccine for it at all back when I was a baby. In the year 2000, when I was an infant, I was hospitalized with it for 2 weeks. I was less than a year old, and I lost 15% of my body weight in a week. But today, thanks to the Gates Foundation, among other organizations spending the money to get the vaccine out to millions of families around the world, rotavirus kills 128,000 children per year, which is down from over 500,000 in the late 1990s. In the early 2000s, the Gates also paid $250 million to put computers and high-speed internet into 11,000 libraries across America. That's 2/3 of every public library building in the entire country. And obviously, the Gates Foundation has partnered with a lot of other organizations, and there are some numbers that were assisted by other factors and blah, blah, blah. But the point is, they spent a lot of money on a lot of problems, and they helped a lot of them get a lot better. I mean, really, that doesn't even describe what they did. Like, in total, the Gates Foundation has vaccinated 1.2 billion children in more than 80 countries around the world. They claim they have saved 82 million lives. The year is now 2019. Bill Gates is more or less seen as a god among mortals on Earth. He participates every year in Reddit's Secret Santa, sending random strangers around the world cute, quirky Christmas gifts that make news headlines every single time. He plays himself on an episode of The Big Bang Theory, the highest-rated sitcom on American television, where his character is so loved that one of the main cast bursts into tears upon meeting him. He's a regular on every major late-night talk show. An Academy Award-winning director makes a 3-hour Netflix documentary about his life called Inside Bill's Brain. His appearance on Ellen DeGeneres guessing the prices of common household items goes viral as one of the most lovable, charming celebrity moments of the year. The video where he and Warren Buffett work a shift serving blizzards at a Dairy Queen in Omaha is somehow even more so. He is no longer a ruthless businessman who will crush his competitors and his employees alike to conquer the world. He is a cute, huggable, well-intentioned philanthropist with a plan to make the world a better place. And it wasn't just pop culture. Beyond just being knighted and being Times Person of the Year, in 2016, Barack Obama personally presents Bill and Melinda Gates with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States.
Few people have had the profound global impact of Bill and Melinda Gates. Through their work at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they've demonstrated how the most capable and fortunate among us have a responsibility to use their talents and resources to tackle the world's greatest challenges. They have transformed countless lives with their generosity and innovation. Bill and Melinda Gates continue to inspire us with their impatient optimism that together we can remake the world as it should be.
Anyone who did dare to make a negative remark about Gates' work was dismissed as unappreciative, pointless, or outright crazy. In August of 2014, The New Yorker published a 9,000-word profile of one of the most prominent global critics of the Gates Foundation's agricultural initiatives. The headline called her controversial. The piece compared her followers to religious creationists. A Reason magazine contributor wrote a follow-up titled, "Vandana Shiva is one of the world's worst people." Criticizing Bill Gates in respectable public circles was something you were basically not allowed to do. The way he was described in journalism, in the press, I can only describe it really as all-out secular worship. He was ranked in global surveys as the world's most admired man for 6 years in a row. He received every award and honor a living person can. By the late 2010s, Bill Gates was a secular saint, the closest thing in the public eye to a Christ-like figure that existed at the time. In between interviews showing off his quirky, fun-loving personality, pictures of him walking hand in hand with the impoverished African children he spent his fortune to give a better life to were ever present.
You built one of the great technology companies in the world and one of the great companies in the world, and now you're building and operating one of the great foundations in the world.
How do you find a balance in all of this? Father, chairman of a major company, a foundation, and then all these other ventures. How's the balance come to you?
I don't mow the lawn.
But it was about more than just giving to charity and kids in Africa. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation came to represent an entire worldview. The idea even had a name, philanthrocapitalism. The idea was simple. The world's hardest problems could be solved by running charities the same way Bill Gates had run Microsoft, with data, scale, marketing, operations, and leverage. This was back when Apple was releasing iPhones and iPods in special red colors in partnership with a company that donated its profits to the Global Fund to fight AIDS. This is back when Bono and his band U2 were considered to be real-life actual activists. And of course, Bill Gates was only one of many billionaires who pledged to give away all of his money to good causes during his lifetime. Mark Zuckerberg and his wife wrote an open letter promising to give away 99% of their fortune. Elon Musk signed and agreed. Larry Ellison signed and agreed. Michael Bloomberg signed and agreed. By 2019, over 200 of the world's richest people had joined a thing called the Giving Pledge, where they promised to give all of their money away to charity to make the world a better place for everybody. It was a generally all-around accepted idea, all the way from academia to pop culture, that billionaires were going to save poor people in poor countries and improve the entire world with their own money, on their own terms, and on their own time. I mean, even Marvel movies back in the day were implicitly about this idea. Iron Man was the biggest movie franchise of the time, and it was about the world's fictional richest man, and all he does for 3 or 4 movies in a row is spend his fortune to look cool and save the world. And so Bill Gates, this cutthroat, ruthless businessman, by spending so much money on charity, had built a beautiful facade for his life. But truly, in a way, it wasn't really even a facade at all. When the evil billionaire that everyone hated for years and years comes back with a plan to save millions of little kids, and the plan works, it kind of just is a good thing, regardless of who did it. That is, until one problem came along that made the facade, as beautiful as it was, shatter into so many pieces that it could never be put back together the same way again. The year is 2020, and the entire world just shut down. Cities are completely empty. Wild deer are wandering through the streets of central Tokyo for the first time in 100 years, while New York City sits totally empty. Honestly, it was terrifying. No one knew how many people would die or how. There hasn't been a global pandemic since 1918. Governments around the world are just unprepared. In a lot of ways, it seems like the only person who might have any idea on what comes next is Bill Gates. Right when the COVID lockdowns began, a years-old video goes viral where he describes in detail what exactly a modern global pandemic would look like, and most of all, claimed that the world wasn't ready for what could happen.
If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war.
And so, at the beginning of COVID-19, Bill Gates is hailed as a prophet. He goes on a circuit on the news, on talk shows, sitting next to Dr. Fauci, if you remember that guy, explaining pandemics and what he thinks we should all do about this virus that came out of nowhere and started killing 100,000 people every month. It was more than just media appearances, though. Before long, the Gates Foundation itself gets directly involved in how the world at large is going to respond to COVID. This is kind of a spiderweb of names and foundations and all this stuff that feels like it should be a little simpler, but basically the way it went down was that when COVID truly became a global pandemic, a worldwide initiative to pay for and distribute COVID vaccines called COVAX is established and directed by 3 sub-organizations, the WHO, of course, and also 2 groups called CEPI and Gavi. Both of these organizations essentially belong to Bill Gates. CEPI is a vaccine research foundation that was established and funded by the Gates Foundation, and Gavi is the organization that Gates established alongside the Gates Foundation to be the logistical hub for buying and giving out vaccines around the world for the last 25 years. The WHO also, in fact, receives 10% of its yearly funding from the Gates Foundation. They are its second largest donor, behind only the nation of Germany. What I'm saying is that Bill Gates was honestly the biggest and most influential player in the world's international organized response to COVID-19. And this was fine and natural. I mean, honestly, it made sense, until it turned out that COVAX wasn't going to work. COVAX, for everything it was meant to be, honestly failed pretty bad. For one, they delivered less than half of their original target for COVID vaccines by the end of 2021. After that, it turned out that only 0.4% of COVID tests and 0.5% of the vaccines went to low-income countries. Literally 99.5% of the vaccines COVAX gave out went to rich countries. By the time the vaccines did reach South Asia or Africa, it was for variants of the disease that no longer even existed. But it wasn't just that they didn't achieve their stated goals. Somehow, it was even worse than that. Because in October of 2020, before any COVID vaccine had been approved anywhere, India and South Africa got together to propose that the international community should temporarily suspend patent protections on COVID vaccines so any manufacturer in the world could more quickly produce more vaccines for people in countries everywhere. The proposal quickly drew support from 100 different nations. The WHO, the African Union, the Pope, Prince Harry, Elton John, everyone who's anybody was endorsing this shit. But why not? Suspending patents for a couple months during a global emergency, it sounds like common sense. That is until Bill Gates said no. People quickly realized Bill Gates was brokering power for his own foundations, that by maintaining the vaccine patents, he would keep his control over the world of vaccines centralized, even if it cost people around the world their lives. And the backlash that Bill Gates faced over this wasn't just about the vaccine or the pandemic. It was deep and structural. It wasn't that the Gates method or the Gates plan didn't work, although again, the COVAX rollout was a total failure. What really turned the tide against him was the realization that everything he had done, whether or not it did work or didn't, only led to him accumulating an unmatched level of power, influence, and control over the whole world that was invisible to 99% of people until now. If one man has major controlling stakes in all three of the biggest pandemic response organizations and foundations in the world, if one man can go on national TV and say no to saving millions of lives by sharing patents for vaccines, it's pretty obvious how that sort of power might be a little bit corrupt. Eventually, the proposal did go through, and Gates was overridden when the Biden administration pushed it, but the damage was done. Bill Gates was no longer seen as just a humble philanthropist. His own words had left the indelible mark of greed and control on the reputation of him and his foundation. The ideology of philanthrocapitalism, combining philanthropy and capitalism to honorably and justly help save the world, it suddenly seemed a lot more unbalanced than it had in years past, as people realized what that really meant in practice, which is giving control to one person over a major industry. Just so happening that in this major industry, millions of people's lives hang in the balance. But the controversy over Bill Gates and the vaccine patent waiver was only the beginning. Because once the Saint image cracked, people started looking back at the past, and what showed up was hard to unsee. Because the Gates Foundation is not just a charity that spent billions saving kids from death and disease. Tim Schwab calls it a structure of power, a political organization whose billions of dollars present exactly the kinds of conflicts of interest that journalists are meant to interrogate. And the Gates Foundation has wielded its power and influence in a lot of ways that most of us may not even be aware of at all. Said another way, the Gates Foundation should be one of the most investigated institutions on Earth, but it's not. It's one of the most admired. The Gates Foundation, like most foundations, had priorities, theories, and ideology, and because it had more money than almost anyone else, those theories didn't stay theories. They became programs, school systems, agricultural policy. For one, the Gates Foundation spent billions of dollars trying to reimagine what the American public school and education system could be. Their agenda, their ideology was smaller schools, new teacher evaluation systems, and they also helped fund the rise of Common Core as a new solution to America's education problems. But the results were not the revolution they imagined. The small school initiative was eventually abandoned, the teacher evaluation push saw huge backlash, and there was very little evidence of improvements. Common Core became one of the most politically hated education reforms in American history, and it was largely repealed around the country. Basically, the Gates Foundation spent billions of dollars on education, and the work they did left no lasting legacy at all. And in a lot of places, going back to what there was before was actually a huge improvement. The Gates Foundation also helped launch AGRA, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, with the promise of transforming African farming. Their goal was pretty massive. They wanted to double crop yields, raise farmer incomes, and cut hunger and starvation in half. And on paper, it sounds like exactly the kind of thing that the Gates Foundation was meant to do. Take a huge humanitarian problem, apply technology, fertilizer, improved seeds, measurement, investment. But again, the results did not match the promise. Journalists have found that in the countries where AGRA operated, hunger actually got worse. The number of undernourished people in AGRA countries increased dramatically while the program was running. Small farmers were pushed towards total dependence on expensive commercial seeds and fertilizers. And in the end, the grand Gates-funded African agricultural revolution started looking a lot less like liberation and more like a capitalistic experiment imposed from above on people who didn't benefit from it at all. In the end, the real reason why people don't like Bill Gates isn't because he was secretly a villain who was trying to ruin the world. The problem is that he's one unelected billionaire who accumulated an almost absurd amount of influence over hundreds of millions of people's public lives. When you have so much money that you can say, hey, let's just imagine a new agricultural system for Africa and we'll put it in practice, we'll pay for everything, we'll make sure that people get more food, better access to blah, whatever, okay? It sounds great, but in the end, if it doesn't work, if redesigning the American school system doesn't work, if redesigning African farms where people get their food on an entire continent doesn't work, and there's no one to hold accountable because the person who did it is just infinitely rich, wealthy, and powerful, that sounds like a bit of a problem. The real story here is that Bill Gates was able to turn his foundation into a monopoly over the world itself. He's shaping education, he's shaping agriculture, he's shaping vaccines and health and all this stuff with no oversight, because in this civilization, as we live in it and exist in it right now, we don't have oversight over people with $100 billion doing whatever they want, including accumulating enough power to where they're basically operating a quasi-world government over dozens of countries, deciding how farms work, how an education system works. And if you're sitting here asking yourself, how did I not know about any of this while it was happening? How did a man whose education, farming, and COVID experiments all failed and made people's lives worse not get talked about? How did he stay the most admired man on earth while all of this was happening? And the answer is because he also owns the media. Over the last 25 years, one of the Gates Foundation's greatest causes, or I should probably say investments, has been journalism. By 2023, the Gates Foundation had in fact distributed over $400 million in journalism grants to organizations all over the world. The BBC took $50 million. NPR took $24 million. The Guardian took $13 million. The Atlantic, ProPublica, the Financial Times, Al Jazeera, the New York Times, countless others, they all received millions of dollars from the Gates. Tim Schwab argues in The Bill Gates Problem that the Gates Foundation's intentions are nothing if not self-serving. He says, to be absolutely clear, Bill Gates is not plowing hundreds of millions of dollars into journalism because he believes in the democratic ideals of the free press or because he's a personal fan of reporting. His private foundation funds the media for the exact opposite reason, to defang his watchdogs and bring them to heel, to promote his agenda and embellish his brand, to create propaganda that builds his political power, and to control the narrative that guides our understanding of his work. Over the years, we've all seen a lot of crazy shit about Bill Gates. People say that he was putting microchips in the COVID vaccines, or that he himself engineered the pandemic, whatever, right? But the truth is scarier than that because it's real. Because all throughout the last 25 years of doing philanthropy and charity and giving away tens of billions of dollars to save lives and invest in new ideas, the end result is that Bill Gates has built an empire of control and influence that has put him on the level of power that a head of state would enjoy without ever having to be elected or held accountable the way that a politician would. There are millions of people who are alive today in various places around the world who probably wouldn't be if the Gates Foundation didn't exist. Kids were vaccinated, disease numbers went down, libraries got computers and internet and access to education, mothers survived childbirth. I'm not going to sit here and say that the Gates Foundation was just a PR stunt. It seems like Bill and Melinda Gates genuinely helped a ton of people, and the world probably is a better place because they did it. But Bill Gates' career as a philanthropist, trying to save the world, it has a critical problem, and it's that he spent the last 25 years doing charity the same way he did tech, by seeking out more control, influence, and domination than anyone else, no matter what. But for a long time, the world didn't care because Bill Gates was so good at getting results. It didn't seem right to question or analyze someone who was saving lives. But COVID changed that. It showed that Bill Gates had built a system of journalism, media, influence, and policy, and all these different platforms and resources, and gave him more power than many heads of state just because he had a lot of money. But none of this is why Bill Gates lost his goodwill in American society. None of this explains alone why Bill Gates is no longer the world's secular saint. Because the reason why Bill Gates is now so hated, even more so than when he strangled the entire tech industry to become the richest man in the world, comes from one thing alone. And that is his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, and the way it revealed more about who he's always been than anything else he's ever done. Just a couple weeks after Jeffrey Epstein died on August 10th, 2019, after being arrested and charged with sex trafficking minors, Bill Gates goes on record during an interview to clear the air, and he says, "I met Epstein, but I didn't have any business relationship or friendship with him."
Those meetings were a mistake. They didn't result in what he purported, and I cut them off. That goes back a long time ago now. So there's nothing new on that.
It would only be a couple weeks before it was proven he was lying, when the New York Times revealed that Gates had in fact been meeting regularly with Epstein for years in the early 2010s. The full extent of that lie, though, doesn't stop there. In fact, it's still unfolding to this day. So here's what we know for sure. Like I said, it's only 2 weeks after Gates claims that he met Epstein but never knew him that the New York Times reports he actually knew him quite well, having met with him countless times, and this is happening years after Epstein got out of prison and was already a sex offender. Now, that was pretty damning on its own, but the Times also showed that Bill Gates, who was still the second richest man in the world at the time, actually had a friendship with Epstein over a period of multiple years in the 2010s, including visits to Epstein's huge townhouse in Manhattan and even flying on Epstein's plane. Now, Bill Gates once again had an explanation for the situation. He only knew Epstein in the context of trying to raise money for his charity, because Epstein had claimed that he could help raise billions for the global health cause, but that Epstein's money never actually appeared, and Gates regretted having entertained him at all.
It was reported that you continued to meet with him over several years, and that, in other words, a number of meetings. What did you do when you found out about his background?
I've said I regretted having those dinners, and there's absolutely nothing new on that.
And so basically what Bill Gates' alibi is here is that Jeffrey Epstein made big promises about how he could help Bill Gates raise billions for his charity, and so Bill Gates entertained him on that basis, but in the end, it turned out Epstein was bluffing, and he was really just saying that to get around Bill Gates, and nothing ever came together. Maybe Gates knew who Epstein was, maybe he didn't, but either way, Bill Gates only had good intentions, right? The only problem is that what happened next after Epstein died is that Bill Gates' life started falling apart from the inside out. In the summer of 2021, about 2 years after Epstein passed away and Bill Gates' connection became public, Bill and his wife Melinda announced their divorce after 27 years of marriage. And Bill Gates and his wife Melinda were life partners in every way possible. This is not the classic story of a rich guy in tech finding a trophy wife to sit around and go to parties for him. Melinda's life story is legitimately impressive. After earning degrees in computer science, economics, and business from Duke, Melinda Gates was hired at Microsoft as a product developer in the late 80s, where she met Bill Gates and began dating him shortly after. For 24 years, she was the co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. That was its official name. It was shared between both of them. And by every account, she was not a ceremonial figure at the organization. She helped set the foundation's direction, priorities, especially around maternal health, child health, global development. In 2016, she and Bill were awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom together, not just as husband and wife, but as a philanthropic partnership. The Gates Foundation brand was Bill and Melinda, not just one or the other. And in March of 2022, around 6 months after their 27-year marriage was officially over, Melinda gave her first statement on the divorce, where she says that she hated that her husband had a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, describing that she knew Epstein was evil personified when she met him and that she had nightmares after meeting him. She said, my heart breaks for these young women because that's how I felt, and here I'm an older woman. I feel terrible for those young women. It was awful. That's Bill Gates' wife, his wife and business partner of 27 years, the namesake of their charity, saying that his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was a big part of what made their empire of giving and their entire life fall apart.
I wanted to see who this man was, and I regretted it from the second I stepped in the door. He was abhorrent. He was evil personified. I had nightmares about it afterwards. My God, I feel terrible for those young women. It was awful.
Bill Gates' embarrassment only continued to get worse. Emails from Bill Gates to colleagues showed that he had written that Epstein's lifestyle is very different and kind of intriguing, although it would not work for me. To which Gates' team tried to explain away as having been a comment on Epstein's taste in furniture and home decor at his house. In Tim Schwab's book, he writes that Bill Gates has an army of people working to keep his reputation sterling and his person free from harm. By the time he met Jeffrey Epstein in the early 2010s, Epstein was a known felon and a registered sex offender, and someone whose misdeeds had been widely profiled in the news media. It is not only unthinkable that Bill Gates did not know exactly what he was doing or who Epstein was, but it is also unreasonable. Even deeper connections only kept surfacing. It became public that a man named Boris Nikolic, who had served for 10 years as the chief science and technology advisor at the Gates Foundation, appears in the Epstein files more than 14,500 times, a huge part of Jeffrey Epstein's life. Nikolic is seen in the Epstein files communicating with Epstein up until right before he died, even to the point where Epstein named Nikolic as the successor executor in his will. He is the fourth most connected person in the Epstein docs. Nikolic and Epstein discussed over a number of years politics, culture, their vacation plans, their personal lives. Nikolic was responsible for famously introducing Epstein to the founder of 4chan, which is a whole story on its own. Then came even more revelations on revelations, like the confirmation that Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein were close enough in each other's lives that Epstein had intimate details about Gates cheating on his wife and was preparing emails attempting to blackmail him for this information. Bill Gates ultimately came forward and apologized to people at his company and in the public for his involvement with Epstein, admitting that he had made a foolish mistake and acknowledging that Epstein had known about his real extramarital affairs, although he insisted that Epstein had discovered them after the fact and that Gates never had anything to do with Epstein's illicit activities. Ultimately, though, with the willingness of the government to let the Epstein case die and to hide the files as much as they can, we don't know, and we might never know, the full extent of Bill Gates' relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. But ultimately, reasonably, for my safety, I'm not going to make any more conjectures about who they really were to each other. Either way, though, Melinda Gates did recently go on record again saying that the release of the Epstein files by the government brought back memories of very, very painful times in her life, and she said that her ex-husband should answer for himself in public. And Bill Gates is actually scheduled to testify before Congress on his relationship to Epstein later this summer. But ultimately, any further details aren't even really necessary, because we know that Bill Gates was friends with Jeffrey Epstein after it was already widely publicized what exactly Jeffrey Epstein had done, after he had already been to prison. The year is 2026. Many, if not most of you, are watching this video on a device that runs software that Bill Gates invented. Every desk in every home and office and school and library and company, the dream has been achieved many, many times over. And Microsoft was arguably very good for humanity. Bill Gates basically built the personal computer as we know it. He introduced software to the world that allows infinitely more efficient ways of working, learning, and communicating that were never imaginable before. His inventions are the foundation of our world. But throughout Bill Gates' story, there's no one who has benefited more from his ideas than him. But I don't mean that in a good way. The judge in the antitrust trial against Microsoft 25 years ago said it best. The worst thing Microsoft ever did wasn't charging too much for something, or sending out a lawsuit against somebody, or threatening a competitor. It wasn't one little action. It was that some innovations would now simply never happen for no reason other than that they didn't suit Bill Gates' agenda. The graveyard of companies whose founders and engineers worked just as hard as Bill Gates and had their own ambitions, their own ideas, that graveyard is full. And the Gates Foundation has operated the same way. It's been good for the world. Bill Gates spent billions of dollars to save millions of lives. He literally took a disease that's been around for the entire history of humanity and nearly erased it from the face of the earth. But when you look at his charity from the right angle, you'll notice it was always about what was good for him. It made him beloved. It made him untouchable. It made him the biggest donor to the World Health Organization. He got genuine political power, giving hundreds of millions of dollars to newsrooms around the world, but a type of political power that no one can take away. And in the end, we'll never know what the world could look like today if Bill Gates instead put that money into developing a fairer, more equal civilization for everybody. A quarter century ago, Bill Gates went out on a quest to give away all of his money and save the world. And society worshipped him for it. But 25 years later, he's now richer than he was when he started the charity in the first place. And the rest of the world is suffering more than ever. The economy during my lifetime has become vastly more unequal. My generation is going to be the first in modern history to have a worse future than our parents. During the decades of the great philanthropist, when we were worshiping people who claimed they could save the world with their own fortunes, the ground was giving way under the rest of us. And this is the big problem of our time. This is the problem that threatens the future of our civilization. This is the problem with Bill Gates. It's not that he's a fraud, it's not that he's a liar, it's that the most generous billionaire, the kindest billionaire, is still putting power, influence, and control in front of what's genuinely good for humanity, which would be building a better, more equal, more fair civilization for everybody. The idea of handing out millions of polio vaccines to the global underclass so they can better enjoy their lifelong poverty while your net worth only continues to break new records year after year, instead of envisioning a new version of how humanity could grow without depending on the well-intentioned yet inherently flawed vision of one person, it just doesn't sit right anymore. The nicest, most generous billionaire is still the wrong person to save the world. All you have to do is look at the way that Bill Gates turned his foundation into a playground for his ideas and a force of monopolistic domination over global health while hiding behind charity and giving. For every good thing he's done for the world, of which there are many, he only continues to symbolize the exact same problems that are stopping us from moving forward into a better future for everybody. While I was working on this video, someone close to me told me that it sounds unreasonable to bring up Bill Gates' connection to Epstein in the midst of everything else he's done for society. But I don't agree with that. Whether or not you believe that Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein were part of a secret elite plot to kill and eat babies, which... the point is simple. If Bill Gates truly cared about making the world a better place, he would not have met with a convicted sex trafficker to try and get him to donate to his charity. But he did, and that will be part of his legacy forever. Because the point with all of these people is that they don't live according to what's good for themselves, the people around them, the good of humanity. They live according to the rules of power, influence, and connections. And no matter how much Bill Gates cares about making the world a better place, he will never and would never do what it would actually take to help, which is give up his status as one of the world's single most powerful people, richer than many nations on Earth, and dedicate himself to truly helping society. In a functioning society, our future would not depend on the whims of one person, whether or not he wants to instigate school programs that do nothing to help anybody and have to be repealed, or whether or not he wants to help this disease or that disease, or make sure these people have food to eat or these people have food to eat. The problem with Bill Gates is not that he gave his money away. It's that he ever had that much money to give in the first place. I'm Philip. This is Volksgeist. Thank you to Incogni for sponsoring the video, and thank you all for watching. I'll see you very soon.
Okay, guys. Oh, 211,000 gold. Oh. Okay guys, I'll stop the stream now. It's mental. That one, it's even better than mine. Fuck's sake.
Hopefully people don't mind the price increase.
Yeah. It's really good. Yeah.